Thank you, Lori. I think, again, when we look back at what we could have been utilizing on our journey with our dad, a book such as Lori's on Changes in Behavior would have been indispensable. So I'm going to introduce Robin, who would not say this herself, but she is the driving force behind the Brain Support Network and created this for the benefit of all as a means of confirming diagnosis at time of death and furthering medical research. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much. Just to be clear, I'm not the driving force behind today's event. That would be Linda. She's the driving force, and let's give her a round of applause. You know, it's funny, several years ago, was it 2009, Helen? But Helen was the driving force behind an event in Santa Rosa. Linda was a driving force behind an event we had a couple years ago here in Sonoma, and now today. So I think there must be something in the water in Santa Rosa between wonderful Lewy body dementia caregivers and driving forces. So it's great to be here. I just wanted to share a few points about the value of caregiver support groups. When my dad was first diagnosed with a rather rare non-Alzheimer's dementia called progressive supranuclear palsy, Dr. Autry showed that one slide of a bunch of pictures of people, and in the lower right corner was Dudley Moore, a British actor. I'm old enough to remember, and I think maybe a lot of you are as well. So people thought Dudley Moore was alcoholic because he stumbled, fell, his speech was slurred, but no, in fact, he had a neurological dementia called progressive supranuclear palsy. And it's typically diagnosed in one fairly easy way. Oftentimes people might go to a neurologist and they move a pen back and forth, and you're supposed to keep your head still and just move with your eyes horizontally and then move with your eyes up and down. And as we get older, oftentimes those movements change, but in progressive supranuclear palsy, they change to quite a large extent, such that the word palsy actually refers not to motor movements or arm limb movements, but it refers to an eye movement. So there's an eye palsy in PSP. And when the doctor asked my dad to put his finger at the tip of his nose and gaze with his eyes to the tip of his nose or his finger, his eyes would not converge, which is another very classic sign of this eye palsy in PSP. So in 2004, he was diagnosed, and I looked around and there was no support group for caregivers. I live on the peninsula in the Bay Area. There was no support group anywhere in Northern California. And so a group of us decided to get together, and we started a caregiver-only support group. Actually, there were 4 of us, and we decided amongst ourselves, do we want to just meet as caregivers, or do we want to have our family members there as well? And we decided to meet just as caregivers. And one reason for that was that we were dealing with symptoms and our own emotions that were hard to share publicly with others. So for example, my dad had erectile dysfunction and urinary incontinence. It would have been very difficult for me to have spoken about those symptoms with my dad sitting at my side. But with caregivers dealing with the same symptoms, some of them were dealing with the same symptoms, some dealing with others, it's much easier to speak openly. And I remember at a recent support group meeting, we were sharing tips and things, and one very common symptom in Lewy body dementia are delusions. And a lady said, well, you know, my husband thinks that I'm having an affair. Of course I'm not, but it's very common for spouses with Lewy body dementia to accuse their spouse of having an affair. And we were saying, well, what do you do about this? It's a very troubling symptom to be accused of infidelity. And she said, well, I tell my husband when he comes to the bed, oh, what's Ronald doing in the bed with us? And she says, well, that's why I got a king-size bed, so that we can all enjoy the bed together. And she makes up, you know, humorous statements, and it works for her particular situation. It wouldn't work for other people's situation. But this is the point of a caregiver support group, is to exchange suggestions and ideas. They may not all be applicable, but hopefully at every meeting we pick up at least one tip for our particular situation. So another aspect of a caregiver support group are these emotions that come up as caregivers. So one issue for me was I was married at the time, newlywed in fact, and my father was having these neurological symptoms. And I was giving more and more attention to my father as opposed to my husband. And I wanted to discuss those feelings, but I didn't want to discuss them really with my husband, and I didn't want to discuss them with my father, because I felt that it was a burden for both of them to talk about these things. So being among other caregivers who perhaps other adult children who were facing similar things, it was very helpful. And being among spouse caregivers who could give their own input on this situation was very helpful. And you just don't find this in other situations. You really have to find a caregiver support group for this. Other things are very practical suggestions that we have in the support group meetings. These are things that you don't pick up from physicians, albeit Dr. Autry is a wonderful physician, but he's not, other than his own family situation, he's not dealing day to day with all of these disorders. And we have people dealing day to day with these disorders on a very practical, real level. And we come up with ideas that other people don't have. So one example very recently was somebody said to Phil Myers in our recent support group that a suggestion that he gave for when his wife fell, to leave her there on the floor, make her comfortable, perhaps bring her a pillow, bring her a blanket, leave her on the floor. Don't have a new struggle for trying to get up off the floor, but leave her down on the floor until she felt she had the energy, and help her up at that point. And a caregiver said at a subsequent meeting that one suggestion helped them so greatly, because they were struggling to help the mother up after she fell. And here, the mother said, "Thank you so much for letting me take a rest on the floor, because really that's what I need." So you never know what suggestion will resonate with people, but these are the kinds of things you pick up at a support group meeting. Another thing we often hear at support group meetings are about condom catheters. And these are not things that are widely known in the community, but they can be wonderful resources for dealing with urinary incontinence for men, to have a condom catheter at night. And it was something we tried with my father. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but I do talk about it at our support group meetings. Another value of a support group meeting is that you're going to a meeting and you're sharing your journey with someone who's already been through it. So our group started in 2004 when my dad was diagnosed with PSP. And we learned pretty early on that PSP can look like 3 other diseases. And one of them, in fact, is Lewy body dementia. PSP can look like Lewy body dementia, corticobasal degeneration, or multiple system atrophy. And in fact, the only way to confirm the diagnosis, as others were saying, is through brain donation. And so we decided to expand our group to include more than just PSP in our group. So we now include all 4 disorders, including Lewy body dementia. And we have about 450 people in our group. Fortunately, not all come to our support group meetings. We only have about 25 or 35 at our group meetings, which is still a lot of people. But these are people all sharing the same journey. And we've been meeting long enough now, 11 years, that a lot of our group members have died. And one of the services that our organization, Brain Support Network, offers is assistance with making arrangements for brain donation. And most of our support group discussion leaders, like Phil Myers and Sharon Reichart, have actually donated their family members' brain upon death, and the diagnosis was confirmed. So when you're sitting next to Sharon at a support group meeting, you know for sure her late husband had progressive supranuclear palsy. And the same is true for Phil and others in our support group meeting. So it's a wonderful resource to know that somebody that you're talking with absolutely had that, their family member had that precise disease. And it's not an advantage that many support groups have, because we've been meeting a long time and we care a lot about this. So I think that support groups are wonderful places to share emotions that you can't burden your other family members, can't burden your other friends with. You can share symptoms that other people, that would be very embarrassing to bring up with other people, and you can share the journey that other people have already taken. So I think they're very important. I hope you'll all consider attending one. Thank you.